As homeschooling parents, we want the best for our children, so it helps to hear what works for other families. Today, veteran homeschooler Cheri Blomquist is here to talk about the importance of teaching systematic grammar. Stay with us.
Welcome to Homeschooling Saints, the podcast that helps you create the homeschool you love for the people you love. Our host is Lisa Mladinich, a Catholic life coach, TV host, best-selling author, and an instructor at Homeschool Connections.
Before we get started, remember to subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you're watching on YouTube, click the bell to join our channel. Welcome, I'm Lisa Mladinich, and today we're talking with Cheri Blomquist about the importance of teaching systematic grammar. Cheri Blomquist is a freelance teacher and author, as well as the mother of 4 daughters and 1 son. She's been part of the homeschool community since 2005 as a parent and as a teacher for various tutorial programs. In addition to her work in education, she has written fiction, poetry, and other materials for various programs and publications, such as the Old Schoolhouse magazine. And she is the author of 2 books, Before Austen Comes Aesop, the children's great books and how to experience them, and Maria Von Trapp and her musical family. Such great topics. Currently, she lives near Nashville, Tennessee, where she continues to homeschool, write, and teach. You can learn more about her writing and teaching on her website, Once Upon a Pen, and we've got that in the show notes for you. Also visit her YA book review website, What's in It? The Concerned Parent's Guide to Young Adult Literature. You are just a plethora of great resources for us, Cheri. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's my joy. It's so good to meet you. Say a little bit for us just about how you fell in love with grammar and writing, because not everybody gets it.
Well, I can't say I love grammar. I love writing, but grammar is one of those things that I think I learned to like pretty well because it's kind of soothing. It's a nice break from the creative chaos of writing. It's kind of very logical and, makes sense. But I was very fortunate to get solid grammar instruction in my little Christian schools growing up. I had it just about every year until high school, and I don't remember high school. It's kind of a blur. But I did learn to love writing very young. I think I was given a lot of creative writing assignments in school, and so I realized I really liked it. So I tried my hand at writing a book, and The Grandfather Clock Mouse, and that was my first little book. And ever since then, I've been writing, some years more than others, and it's been what I kind of just grew into. Decided that was what I wanted to do if I could. So.
Yeah. Oh, I love stories about how people get kind of ignited about writing. And for me as a writer, I'd been a writer for a while when I first got a chance to teach a little academic writing for Homeschool Connections. And I learned so much. And I realized how powerful it was for helping with clarity. That when you really want someone to understand your thoughts, that punctuation and grammar stuff really comes in handy.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
It
It's
really
almost like
does.
focusing the lens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep, you really can't leave grammar out. There's just, at some point you have to know how to do it correctly. And you have to know how to punctuate. And it's not part of the creative process, but it is part of the process of polishing up a piece of writing, no matter what kind it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, amen to that. And it gives you such confidence too. So define for us the term that we're using today, which is systematic grammar.
That's a good question, because maybe what I mean by it isn't what other people mean by it. But first we need to define grammar itself. And by that, I kind of have 2 ways of thinking about it. One is that umbrella term grammar. When we talk about a grammar class, we talk about the parts that make up our language, the parts of speech, the clauses, the predicates, and so on. But then we also include usage, we include mechanics, and we include style. And all 4 of those pillars fall under the umbrella term of grammar. But then there's also grammar as in the literal grammar, where we're parsing a sentence and understanding its component parts. So when I talk about systematic grammar, I'm talking about all 4 pillars of grammar. And when I talk about that, it's, well, either way, actually, it's more a logical, very organized manner of teaching grammar, so that the student understands the inner structures and rules of our language, or whatever language they're learning. Really, I'm sure it applies to any language. And so it is a manner of teaching in such a way that we begin in that the student gets the foundation of our language, so that then we can build upon it with the mechanics, knowing where to put the punctuation, the capitalization. So we know how to use grammar properly. Like subject-verb agreement. You can't talk about subject-verb agreement if you don't know what a subject and a verb are. So you need to have that foundation of the inner workings and the components, so that you can talk about usage and you can talk about punctuation. And then from there, once you have that mastery of the basics of the things that make up our language, then we add style. And that's where you can make your writing beautiful. And that's where you can manipulate our language to the best effect, like Shakespeare did, where he was able to do exactly what he wanted for the effect of his poetry and his plays, or what any poet does. And it's where we can be attentive to the rhythms of our writing and say, oh, this doesn't sound very good. It would sound better if I wrote the sentence like this. But you can't do that very well if you don't know enough about our language to see that one part can fit over here just as grammatically as another part, and be able to discern that the rhythm would be better if it was over here. And so style is kind of what we're going for, but you have to have the other pillars in order to establish that style and be able to have that mastery and over the language. And for example, if you don't know what a prepositional phrase is, you can't identify misplaced modifiers, or what's the other term I'm looking for? Dangly modifiers. You can sense it. You might see it and instinctively know how to move a phrase like that. But if you know what a prepositional phrase is, you can spot it immediately and say, oh, this is a dangly modifier. I need to put it over here. But you can't do that if you don't know grammar. So systematic grammar does that. It helps the student understand thoroughly, so that they have that language and that understanding in order to do the other 3 pillars effectively, or use them.
Yeah. And it's so neat when you start to see the light bulbs go off for student writers too. It's almost like when you see a toddler first learning to ice skate, and they're just learning how to shift their weight and maybe eventually do a little bit of a circle and eventually a figure 8. They're laying track work for the more complex, more personalized movements that will evolve over time. But it's just like any art form, is that it has a structure. It has something that then you can be incredibly creative with once you master the basics.
Exactly. I took ballet for 7 years as a child, and I couldn't do tours jetés across the floor if I didn't know how to do a plie and a tendu. And, they're boring and they're at the bar, and sure, I can I can be told to point my foot while I do a tour jeté, which is a jump across the floor, but I will do it far better if I have exercises at the bar in which I specifically practice tendus, which is just pointing the foot. So anything a sport or an art has a technique, has an inner structure, like you said, has a theoretical base. And anybody who knows that will do a better job because they understand. They really understand. So.
Yeah. And like you said, it's practice, 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 drilling, 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 whether it's piano or acting or any art form. There's something that has to become so familiar that it becomes a part of you, and then really releases all of that potential for expression.
Yeah. And there's times too that, you can, like, as a writer, I can just write creatively and not think about my grammar. But if I get to the point where I'm stuck and I'm really struggling, and I just don't know what I want to say next, or I don't know how to say it, that's when my creative spirit kind of dies, and I have to rely on the techniques I know. I have to rely on the craft of writing, because I don't have, my creative mind is just kind of, but if I have that strong base of grammar and how a paragraph is structured and things like that, then I can go back to that base and keep going, even when I don't feel like it. And that's a creative thing, not really grammar, but I think it applies to just about anything. The more we understand, the more power we have over that thing. And grammar is no different, even though it's treated that way in American education.
Yeah, and really good writing and really good expression has kind of fallen by the wayside in a lot of American education, unfortunately. But sometimes, like you said, you might be creatively blocked, but if you know what the shape of it needs to be, you can do all your bad writing in the correct shape and go back when you've had a break and come back with fresh eyes and pour some inspiration back in. But having that framework to work with, again, I'll just say it again, creatively, it sets you free.
Yeah, when I teach writing, I very specifically tell my students to separate, to when they're composing, to forget about grammar and spelling and punctuation, because our critical mind can kind of snuff out our creative mind. And when we're trying to create, we can't also be criticizing ourselves. We can't do both at the same time very well. And so I tell them, you focus on the rough draft, you're pre-writing, you're revising, get your ideas the way you want them. And then when you get to editing and proofreading, that's when you take out your editor hat. And that's when you look at your grammar, your diction, your punctuation, and all those things. There's plenty of time, and you can, you don't have to do it while you're composing. It is very mind numbing. It can kill that creativity.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but I feel like, American education has, the problem with what has happened in American education is that they have, the educators have pretty much snuffed out systematic grammar. And the problem is that they have gone overboard in trying to keep that creative spirit alive in student writers so that they can compose, but they've gone to the other extreme in getting rid of sufficient grammar instruction. And that is where I really part company with fellow educators, because I've seen what happens when students don't have sufficient grammar instruction. They really struggle when they get to the editing and proofreading steps of the writing process, and at that point they're lost, and they can't fix what they can't see. They might feel it, they might say, this doesn't sound good, but I don't know what to do about it. But they can't improve something they don't understand. And even though we speak fluent English, that doesn't necessarily transfer the same way to an essay or a research paper or something. It seems like it should, but it doesn't necessarily. And if you don't know the rules for commas, you may not know that dependent clause needs a comma after it, and that can change the whole meaning of the sentence without that comma. Mm-hmm. The common example I've heard is go eat, grandma. You have the comma after eat, go eat, grandma, instead of no commas, go eat, grandma. That comma makes a difference.
It certainly does.
Yeah. So I very much advocate that students need that systematic grammar to fill in those gaps. But back in the 80s, I think it was the 80s. I read 1985. I'm not sure if that's true. But back in the 70s or 80s, schools began to drop that, except for little dinky Christian schools like mine that kept on with their traditional ways. And the idea was that grammar does not make you a good writer. It does not promote good writing. And students will learn to write by writing. And so when I was in teacher training college, then I was taught by my professors. I went to a conservative Christian college. Okay, so this had become mainstream by then. And it wasn't about liberal and conservative, left or right, or anything like that. It wasn't about it was really mainstream by then that teachers should teach, and I was taught to teach this in my teacher training classes, that when I taught English, I should just have students write and not even teach them any structured writing lessons, which I've done an about face on that. But I was also taught to teach mini lessons during a writing project. So when I would see a student, when I would look at the student's work, I would say, oh, we need to do a little mini lesson on semicolons. And then I would do the semicolon lesson, then we go on with the writing project. So I would insert mini lessons as needed. And I guess it sounded okay, back then. And really it was kind of untried. We hadn't seen the results of this new way of doing things, because it used to be that systematic grammar was the norm throughout the country. My grammar book is a classic in the field. If you want to be really grammar nerd about it, the Warrener's English Grammar and Composition book, which was used in public schools throughout the country for many years, including my school. And so it used to be that kids got it, but then the students, the teachers dropped that off and they did the mini lesson approach. And I've read that educators will swear by this, that I've seen an improvement in my students' writing because I focus on the writing and not doing the systematic grammar. I can't deny that's what they've seen, but I haven't seen that. I've seen the opposite. I've seen students struggle because they don't know. They just don't know that they have a comma splice. They don't know that they have the commas in the wrong place and that their grammar is incorrect. So I've kind of gone the opposite direction.
Yeah. And just briefly, you mentioned this idea that there are disagreements about the way students learn. What are some other common objections to teaching this kind of, I wanted to say strategic, and it kind of is, systematic grammar?
Well, I think that the main mantra is that it doesn't promote good writing, and that actually is true. It doesn't help you become a good writer. You can study all the grammar in the world, but it's not going to help you compose beautiful ideas and excellent stories and good arguments. It's a different realm from that, but it has to be subjugated to writing, and to the overall writing umbrella. It can't be just ignored. And educators will also say that the other big argument I've seen is that it kills the creative spirit. And because students get so worried about the rules and techniques that they lose their the creativity and their ability to be free on the page and develop their own voice. Well, I can't deny that either, because I actually agree with that, because that happened to me. When I got so much grammar in school that, and I, as I said, I like to write. I wrote all the time. I would write during recess. I would write behind my, my desk while my teacher was, off talking to a parent or something. I was very much immersed in my own little world for years, and I wrote as a form of play. But I remember that sometime in middle school, I started to be very worried about following the rules, and I became very rule-minded. I remember feeling very stiff, and my writing got kind of wooden and stiff and formal. Even the creative assignments, and I got a lot of those in school. Even my creative writing assignments just kind of stiffened up, and it did kind of kill my creative spirit for years. I went through high school, not just focused on the things that teenagers are focused on, but also very attuned to rules. And so my creative voice just kind of died for years. And so you can, it took me years to get it back. I had to actually do a lot of work to awaken that in me again. So you can go the other extreme and make grammar so important that it excludes what really matters, which is expressing creative, ideas effectively. But that's what grammar is supposed to do. It's supposed to help the student become a more effective writer, but it's only a part of that. It's in that end stage. And so when these teachers talk about, when the educators talk about how it doesn't promote good writing, that is true, but you have to, there's the but there.
Yeah.
But you can't ignore it either. And systematic grammar, instead of the little mini lessons here and there that I was taught to use, systematic grammar ensures that the gaps are filled in, that when a student looks at a sentence and then they see a problem, they know exactly what problem it is because they've had all of it. They haven't just had mini lessons that target certain weaknesses so that their knowledge is piecemeal. And that I think is really important. It eventually that thorough knowledge becomes very important, and it helps foster independence and confidence when the students are ready to polish a piece of writing.
Amen. Hey, we're going to take a quick sponsorship break for just a second here, hear from our wonderful sponsors, Maureen and Walter, and we'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Walter Crawford.
And I'm Maureen Whitman.
We are the co-founders of homeschoolconnections.com and proud sponsors of the Homeschooling Saints podcast,
which is here to help you homeschool more joyfully, more easily, and more effectively.
We want to thank you for listening.
And we invite you to check out our courses at homeschoolconnections.com.
And now, back to our program.
All right, we're back, and we're here with Cheri Blomquist. Cheri, what are some of the ways that understanding the mechanics of writing really bears fruit in the development of our children? What are you seeing?
Well, I guess I touched on it just a minute ago. I hate to repeat, but it fills in the gaps. And like I said, it helps develop that confidence. It helps to ensure that when a student is ready to polish a piece of writing, that they don't have to depend on a parent or somebody else to proofread their work, which is still a good thing to do. I mean, your brain will not catch all of the mistakes. I've written things that I proofread over and over and over and still found mistakes 10 times later. But at least I had the knowledge to find it, and eventually my eyes will catch it. So along with filling gaps and boosting your confidence, the third thing that it does very well is that it helps them to become polished speakers and writers in general, so that later when they graduate from high school, they are ready to write that college application essay. They're ready to write a business letter. They have the ability to write a polished piece of writing in the sense it's a life skill that they will use for the rest of their lives, and it can really matter for their careers. It can matter if they have a business presentation to do. It can matter if they have to write an email for an entire company, or if they're a teacher and they have to communicate with parents. There's all kinds of scenarios. I would imagine even somebody who's a blue-collar worker who does more physical tasks may need to communicate with clients. And the more you can do that with technical precision, and the more you can say exactly what you want to say, the way you want to say it, I think the more credibility you have as a writer. If your writing is riddled with mistakes, and you're trying to convince an admissions office to accept you into the college or something like that, you lose some credibility. I've actually heard people, I had a friend once who looked at a website and she said, well, they have a mistake. She didn't even take seriously what that website said because she saw a grammatical mistake. I'm like, whoa, and my dad, funny, it's kind of funny. The one thing he'd always get mad at me about was if I made a grammar mistake. Of all the things he could be mad at me about, that's what he chose to be mad at me about. But I think for him, there used to be a mindset that when you spoke correctly and you wrote correctly, it actually kind of boosted your social status because you appeared to be educated. I don't know if it's still that way anymore, but I think it is to a point. When we see something riddled with errors, we I wonder if I should pay attention to what this person has to say. They can't even write correctly. And it's not fair. It has nothing to do with what they had to say, but it is kind of the judging the book by the cover that we all tend to do at times. My uncle was a seminary professor, and if he saw a couple of errors in his students' paper, because by then they're adults, they should be able to write a paper, he would get angry and he would just kind of fling it back at the student, didn't want to grade it. He might even fail them. He was It's like, I'm glad I wasn't his student. But, that's what happens when you get to be an adult and you're expected to be at a professional level. And if we do that, help our students when they're kids, then we're giving them skills for life, for speaking and writing and communicating effectively.
Yeah. So tell us about some of your favorite tools or techniques. What are some resources? And feel free to include your own programs here. But just give us a little bit of the lay of the land of what you see that's valuable.
I borrow. I mean, there's courses I've written where I've done it almost completely on my own. I've borrowed little from others. My book Before Austin Comes ASAP, well, that was modeled partly on how to read a book by blanking on his name. But with grammar, I stuck with tradition, the Warner's English Grammar and Composition program, which, like I said, for grammar nerds is kind of a classic in the field of grammar books, because it's systematic and because it's very simple, no nonsense. The rules are in red. It's a nice size so that you can put it on a shelf and take it out as a reference book after you're done using it as a textbook. Unfortunately, it's out of print, so you have to go. You have to hunt for them. In fact, I've collected a whole bunch of them. So if I decide I need a few, then I can then I have them. But the main thing is that there's a good systematic program that follows grammar logically and doesn't leave out gaps. It doesn't leave gaps. But so I do rely on a textbook for that instead of my own expertise or whatever. But I also borrowed an idea from Michael Clay Thompson, who is a major homeschool language arts author, teacher. He wrote some program called Grammartown and Royal Fireworks Press, and he developed the idea for four-level analysis, I think it's called, and I tweaked it. I've added to that a little bit, but that inspired me a lot, and I use that a lot in my teaching. So I have 6-level analysis. And then that's a major component for continual review and practicing parsing a sentence. And that has been hugely, hugely helpful. So thanks to him. And then the third thing that I do that I think is super important is to use real writing as a teaching tool, because the ultimate goal here is to help my students become more effective speakers and writers. So we have to use real writing at some point. I don't make them write so much. I let that stay for grammar or for writing class, but I do take real pieces of writing from classic literature or something I've written, and I will use that and have them apply what we've been talking about. Find the prepositional phrase, find the dependent clause. I'll have them apply them to actual writing, but I'll also make mistakes. I'll take a passage and I'll make all kinds of mistakes. It used to be called daily oral language in some schools. It's a common thing for teachers to do. Make a lot of mistakes and have the students find them, because if the students practice that a lot, at some point, if you get a lot of practice finding mistakes in someone else's work, then you develop the skills for looking for those details, finding the missing comma, finding the missing capital letter. All those tedious little details are easy to miss. If you get used to practicing them and finding them, and you get really good at it, then you can turn around and use it on your own writing, and you're more likely to find the mistakes in your own writing. And that's, of course, the ultimate goal, not critiquing somebody else's writing. And so those three things I think are really important. I've also found that live classroom instruction can make a difference, because I've found that independent study, or when I taught live, I'm able to answer a lot of questions I wouldn't have anticipated that students would have had just following the book. I would have thought, well, it's pretty cut and dried, just follow it. It's not really that simple. A lot of students need unpacking and discussing and explaining. It's not intuitive, and so live instruction can help a lot.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. We've covered so much in a short period of time. I really appreciate when I meet someone who has a passion for a subject. It's just so much more fun than you would have thought it would be. Like when you first start the conversation. I mean, I'm a grammar geek too. I'm sure I'm not at your level, but it's just so much fun talking with you. What kind of final thoughts or tips of any kind would you like to leave our listeners with, Cheri?
Well, I guess I kind of want to go back to one idea that American educators do have right, and that is easy to go the other way too much with grammar. And I just want to read this quote. So this quote came from George Hillocks, who was a University of Chicago professor of English and Education in 1984. And he had this to say: "School boards, administrators, and teachers who impose the systematic study of traditional school grammar on their students over lengthy periods of time in the name of teaching writing do them a gross disservice that should not be tolerated by anyone concerned with the effective teaching of good writing." And what he has to say there is key when he says that in the name of teaching writing. It's important to understand that teaching grammar is part of writing. It is not the same as teaching writing. Writing instruction is about composition, arguments, ideas, creativity, stories, all those things that make us want to read a piece. But grammar is part of that, and it cannot be overlooked. So we don't want to go to one extreme or the other. We need to teach grammar. So I encourage people to not teach grammar at the expense of writing. All the diagramming in the world isn't going to help your student become a good writer. But do teach it in a systematic way over, I think Susan Wise Bauer once suggested once in elementary school, once in middle school, and once in high school. I don't know if I'm remembering that correctly, but teaching it, and then the other years that you're not teaching systematic grammar, constantly apply it, give feedback, have them practice. When they write a paper, mark the mistakes and remind them, if you see a common mistake, like I had a student who always did comma splices, then I had to remind her what a comma splice is and tell her to watch for that. So then you can go back and reteach. But, we need to have a balance, and make sure that writing is at the forefront, because that's really what it's all about.
Yeah. Oh, so much fun. Cheri, thank you so much for being with us. And thanks everybody for listening today. You can find Cheri at onceuponapen.studio, and that's in our show notes. And we've also got her book review website as well, that WIILIT guide.com. And what does that stand for? What's in it?
What's in it? Yeah. So it's kind of WeLitGuide.com if you're familiar with the We, a machine. So think WeLitGuide.com.
Great. And that's in the show notes.
And you can access it from my other website as well.
All right, great. So it's kind of one-stop shopping for Cheri Blomquist at onceuponapen.studio. All right, Cheri, thanks a million. God bless you, everybody. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
And that's our show for today. Our program is sponsored by homeschoolconnections.com. Be sure to subscribe to Homeschooling Saints and leave us an honest review. God bless you, and thank you for joining us.